All right, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today, I already had a video done. And recorded for today, but I decided, you know what? I'm just gonna scrap it, and I'm just gonna record something live for you guys here. Really, the main thing I went over in that video that I already recorded was just a lot of the talk about SBMM in this game. There's a lot of people right now speculating that SBMM is still rampant in Black Ops 7, and I feel like a lot of people might write it off as right now, oh, it's just the usual suspects. It's just Foley, the Rick, Blame Truth. They're like the people that would be easy to single out as just hating on the game. But I don't watch Foley too much, but I watch the Rick and I watch Blame Truth, and watching their videos today, they brought up some pretty good points. I'm not really the guy to give you a lot of analysis when it comes to SBMM and these different kinds of things, especially when it comes to a point that I hadn't really thought about too much myself, which is the difference in even just the feeling of the game from the beta to full release. Because to be honest, for the full release of this game, I didn't even really get to play that much, to be honest. I played on the last day, the last 2 hours literally of the betas when I finally got on to try it out, and I liked it. Everything felt smooth, it felt quick, responsive. Matchmaking, was kind of a breath of fresh air. It felt like, I was getting the matches pretty quick, and that's one of the things that the Rick was really honing in on, is taking so long to matchmake in the full game. It doesn't feel at all like it did in the beta, which, to an extent, I can see that, but, I think I'd probably just go ahead and take their word for it. I mean, these are guys that have played a lot of COD, especially in the beta. Even if you just tried to say, hey, it's just the typical COD haters talking about the game and having bad things to say about it. Now, I think this conversation, it's definitely going to lead to probably just a darker period of talking about the game where, not a lot of people are really going to have positive things to say about it. So if you're someone that, just tries to enjoy the game and tries to block all that out, hopefully it doesn't discourage you, hearing people bashing the game all the time. But, to an extent, I think some of this needs to be said. I mean, if the developers are actually doing this stuff, I feel like with how transparent Treyarch has been, what would be the problem with them coming out and just saying, what, look, this is what's going on. Either way, whether they're doing something or they're not, maybe this is just all in, everyone's heads and it's not that big of a deal, and people are just kind of overthinking it because of all the lies we've been told by the developers before now. I'm not going to say it's impossible that that's the case. We have right now, especially with everyone doing the camo challenges, we really have three. We have open, we have standard, and then we have hardcore. And I know I've been spending a lot of my time the past couple days, if not all of my time, in hardcore, grinding out some camo challenges. And I think that three-way split, especially, we're seeing, sales in the UK for physical copies of the game were down 61%. We're seeing so fewer people on. I think normally in a year where COD is selling well, where maybe we wouldn't be feeling this dilution of the different matchmaking types. I think in this year, because we are so down on players, I think it's, standing out a little bit more. Maybe that's where some of this comes from, where, it feels super sweaty, and maybe that's just because, so we're missing some of the casuals. Because obviously, if you want to play the game casually, I mean, that's what they put standard in the game for. But I'd like to get your guys' opinion on this as well, so please let me know in the comment section. Let me know how matchmaking has been going for you so far. Do you think a lot of this is just people overreacting? Do you just not even really care if SBMM is in the game? Do you feel like it is? Let me know down in the comment section below. One thing I noticed today as well, just while I was on Twitter scrolling through the timeline once I got back on my PC, I guess there was a little bit of drama going down between the COO of Rust, Alistair McFarlane, and the dev team of Delta Force. It looks like someone on the Delta Force team actually just completely ripped a C4 model from Rust that was made in-house by the Rust team. I guess they put out a picture of the C4 and some promotional material, and Alistair called them out, but he also did put out a follow-up tweet that Delta Force reached out and apologized to them and that it's all resolved now. So it's interesting to see. We're talking about a lot of this AI slop with Call of Duty. It's interesting to see that, once again, we have different developers cutting corners. But enough of all of that. That's not really the crux of what I wanted to talk about today. Yesterday I talked a little bit with you guys about, nostalgia when it comes to Call of Duty and old YouTube, and, watching some old creators from back in the day and just sort of reminiscing on the way Call of Duty content used to be, reminiscing on some past games. And I know this person's kind of a controversial figure, especially in the current year we're in. But I was on YouTube today and I saw that 2 days ago, Police of Redemption put out his first Call of Duty commentary in years. And I watched it, and, really, he's just talking about everything that everyone has been talking about with the new game and, the past couple years with Call of Duty. But, it's just one of those things that brings me back, where really what I set out to do with doing commentaries, because it may not be obvious based on this channel that I ever, did anything other than Call of Duty commentaries, but there was a period of time where I wasn't, I started doing commentaries on my original channel that I made, and like anything, things change. I always heard for the longest time, those videos people like to milk, giving advice to small YouTubers, this is how you can be successful, when, the success that they've gotten on YouTube seems to be from telling people how they can get success on YouTube, those kinds of channels. And everyone was given the same advice. And, to their credit, some big creators say the same thing, and it's make the kind of content that you would like to watch. So, you know, as, you know, time passes, as my taste in YouTube changes, you know, the kind of content that I was making change, you know, went from Call of Duty commentaries to maybe more like a funny moments format. And, you know, I'm not going to say that I didn't enjoy making that stuff. You know, I definitely enjoyed it. And I think a blend of all those things mixed together is really what I'd like to bring to this channel. But, you know, it's just one of those things that, you know, makes me pause for a second and just brings me back and reminds me to, you know, take a second and think about, you know, what I'm even trying to do here, what my purpose is on here. Now, you know, obviously at the end of the day, it's a hobby. You know, I'm not doing this as a job or a career or anything. You know, it's nice to have those moments where, you know, it just, you know, gives you a second to pause and think about things. And, you know, it kind of reminds me of, you know, why I wanted to do commentaries in the first place. You know, what exactly it was that I got out of commentaries that I was watching from my favorite creators that, you know, inspired me to do this. And, you know, I could think back to people like Jev, people like, you know, like I mentioned in the video, TBNR Frags. And, you know, for me, a lot of what it was is just kind of that conversation, you know, aspect. You know, I think it's the same reason why, you know, I like listening to podcasts, you know, now that I'm older. Having that dialogue and, you know, having that conversation, talking about subjects, you know, with people on YouTube, you know, it's, you know, in a lot of ways, it's kind of therapeutic. And I think for me, when I was younger, you know, maybe I took something from it, you know, greater than what I thought to myself at the time. But I think to an extent, you know, where commentaries these days kind of lose me and where, you know, I start to lose my interest and I fall off and I'll stop watching for a while is, you know, when the content kind of shifts from, you know, what I'm personally looking to get out of it, which is kind of that connection, you know, it's nice to know what's going on. The commentary becomes, you know, just going over patch notes or, you know, even I guess to an extent a little bit of what it was used to be back in the day with live commentaries on really good gameplays, just, you know, talking about playing the game. What I really get out of it is just, you know, the connection to the actual person and, you know, getting a feel for their personality and feeling like you're having that kind of dialogue, you know. That's definitely something that I want to try to bring back on this channel and try to keep it, you know, just personality based as possible. You know, I'll talk about different things going on, and I've been doing that the past couple days. I feel like just the way YouTube is in general, you know, it's easy to kind of get boxed into that and, you know, really hard to feel like you can get away with not doing it, you know, and so much of the other creators, bigger or smaller, are doing that. You know, it's hard to feel like there's really a way of getting out there and trying to find some success that isn't doing that. And, you know, maybe that's where I'm foolish a little bit. Maybe I'm not, you know, amplifying my personality as much as I need to, or acting out in the ways that I should, you know, if I wanted to get clips out there and, you know, pop super quickly and have this, you know, meteoric rise. But really what I'd like to try to bring is just, you know, the fact that, you know, I'm me, you know, maybe to a fault. Fuck happened to this guy? What the? I don't know if anyone kind of feels the same way as me, but even, you know, with the kinds of videos that Blame Truth makes, you know, once it becomes more yelly and screamy and he's just ranting and raving about different things, you know, it's where, you know, just personally for me, he kind of loses me. You know, I'm not really the kind of person, you know, even if I am frustrated with the game, my personality just doesn't really line up with wanting to listen to someone like literally yell and scream about it. You know, to an extent, if like for the bit, you know, sometimes it's funny, but really I can only really tolerate a couple of his videos within like a month's time before it just really starts to get old. But, you know, I know there's people that really love BT, and, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say that, you know, you shouldn't watch him. You know, that's what I think is the great thing about YouTube and about, you know, just commentating on things, is there's so many different voices and personalities out there that, you know, you don't have to just watch one kind of person or one kind of personality, one kind of, you know, even just style of editing. You know, you can get a blend of different things and really, you know, find a mix that works best for you. Hopefully I made sense to at least someone. You know, I want to have more videos like this where I'm just talking, you know, about, you know, stuff that's on my mind, you know, not necessarily telling stories exactly, but, you know, just reminiscing, you know, doing some introspection, you know, talking about the past, you know, different lessons I've learned over time. Yeah, it's about 5 p.m. right now, so I'm going to go ahead and start putting this together. Apologies about the late upload last night. I kind of pushed it off probably a little bit too long than I should have, but let me know down in the comment section what you think about, you know, anything that I talked about today. Feel free to, you know, give me your opinions on anything that I had to say. But with that being said, I think I'll leave it there for today. And as always, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will catch you guys later.